Hi, everybody. I am actually Gabrielle Heyman, and I run brand partnerships for Zynga. We are a massive gaming company with 200 million global players. And I'm so excited and grateful to be here today with Linda Lee. Linda, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Linda Lee, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Campbell's Soup Company, overseeing our meals and beverages portfolios. So we're very simple, pretty much one geography, two divisions. We've got our snack divisions and then our meals and beverages, and that is more than just soup.
But look at your shirt. Everyone see her awesome shirt today, which is like the first thing you notice when you see you. That's amazing.
Yes, and what's awesome is this is not of our own doing, and maybe we'll touch on, just in terms of what does modernizing an icon, what does that encompass? What is it? This was a friend sending me a link saying, you must get this. And of course, I quickly said, buy now, and then actually thought about, wait, did they license this? Can I be wearing this? Luckily, we're all okay.
I know, well, it's such an iconic brand, right? Thanks to Andy Warhol and just the ubiquity of it. So, icebreaker, what was your favorite Campbell soup growing up, and what is it now?
So funny, I caught the back end of Marissa's session, and being Chinese American, I grew up in the US, born and raised in the US, we had homemade soup every night. It was always one of 5 dishes, and so soup in my life was just part of what dinner was. But because of that, I actually never had Campbell's soup until I started working here at Campbell's. And it's, for me, it actually provides a bit of perspective of what we're trying to do as a brand, as a company, which is how do you attract new generations, new users into what we have if you didn't grow up with it. And that was, funny enough, it was a question I had with my team when I first arrived of, do people actually know what condensed soup is? Because I don't, and if I don't, I have to believe others don't. And if you don't have those established memories and moments from childhood, how do we expect others to have the same? So in that way, that naiveness is something I would say generally in my career. I've always looked at it from a lens of how do I make it a strength, in terms of, she also talked about empathy, in terms of really understanding a breadth of consumers, and certainly in this case, who are we trying to bring into the brand?
So interesting. Yeah, I remember growing up with Campbell's tomato soup,
Yes.
and what I really remember is the fascination with the can opener. And then we had the manual kind, and then we got like the automatic,
Yeah.
like electric kind, and opening it and cooking it. So it's a funny
Now we have
memory.
EZO, and we constantly debate how important is the EZO top versus there is something in the interaction of a can opener that makes it part of the experience.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
And so water or milk?
Um, gosh, I think milk. Yeah.
I didn't think
Extra
there was any
protein.
other way,
Right.
but I guess there really is.
Interesting. Yeah, that's always the conundrum too with like chocolate. Do you want the water or the milk? All right. So, Campbell Soup started in 1897. It's amazing to see the longevity of the brand, and you've been there for 4 years. But you started or before Campbell's, you were at a challenger brand, Chef's Cut Real Jerky. So, how does it differ, from being at a brand now with like this over 150-year legacy versus a challenger brand?
Yeah, and I went to Chef's Cut, which was venture in a venture state at that time here in New York. But the 20 years prior, it was very much classic CPG. So from Procter to General Mills to Cadbury, Kraft, Mondelez, 20 years across a lot of categories and a lot of large established brands. And what happened was in 15, I read a book and I decided that if I wanted to be a relevant marketer and general manager, I needed to remove myself from these large established companies and needed to go learn data needed to go learn what it truly is to work with the founder. I went to Stonyfield, worked with Gary Hirschberg. That is led by purpose, not at a brand level, but at a company level. And the third was around startups. What does it really, I actually believe startups, and Gary, learning under Gary, that's where I learned marketing, even though I had been at these amazing companies. And so I never thought I'd go back to a larger company. This came up out of nowhere a bit, and I'm very good at saying yes, and I love challenges. And in coming back, and I see it like that, coming back to something large, what I appreciate that maybe I didn't previously was just the resources, the depth of knowledge, the sophistication, and the complexity of challenges. And I'm very much driven by challenges, and so I appreciate all of that and coming back to something large and so established and having gone through many trials and tribulations over the 100+ years. What I miss maybe, or valued from my startup experience was the clarity of the mission and everyone being aligned on one goal. And I look at my time and where I spend it. Today, it's a lot of meetings. That is how my time is spent. Versus when I was in the startup, it was a lot of just doing. You have a conversation, make a decision, and you do and move. So I do miss the simplicity of it, but realistically, the challenges are also much simpler relative.
Yeah, I relate to a lot of that. Meetings all day, and then I think it's a really big kind of organizational decision to figure out how to get yourself
Yes.
out of meetings so you can actually think and be strategic.
Exactly, because it ends up being, rightly, wrongly, it ends up being evenings, weekends, when you really have a moment to step back and think, but it is critical. Yesterday, I spent the whole day, I was in Chicago with our agencies and my leadership, so it was a bit of the leaders on both sides, and we spent an entire day just stepping back and saying, how do we feel about the work that we've been doing? What do we wish for each of the brands? Who inspires us, from other brands and categories? So that was rare to have that day, but really critical.
So interesting. So, well, speaking of, all of this and how we grew up with foods that we ate, and, younger Gen Z, for example, Alpha, what strategies are you taking to modernize Campbell's Soup, but still like maintaining that legacy because it does have such an amazing legacy?
Yeah, I've been here now for almost 4 years, and I would describe the first 2.5, 3 years as one of which was around culture and humans, our consumers, getting way closer, much more agile, and then having the courage to just go and create work that then matters. And in that, I described it as very much, what's the neighborhood? If we're moving neighborhoods, who are our neighbors? How do we think about that through the lens of our partners, how we show up? So for us, being in consumer products, the label really matters. Single biggest touch point. Those were, in doing so, for me, probably the biggest decision, besides just stating that that's the goal, was the people of which I felt had that inherent, back to intuition, judgment, had that in them to be able to quickly carry the ball forward. But the key to I think this modernization journey that we've been on is that it's never done, and that was pretty much a bit of my aha of, ooh, we got to carve out the day, because the things that we've been doing, you start to get familiar, and it starts, for me, I probably started to feel like, ooh, are we being safe? Does it start to feel like we're just going through a playbook of what's been successful, and we need to inject kind of a new relook at it? So I think to be able to stay modern, you have to continue to challenge yourself. But then I probably was more concerned about authenticity earlier just because I didn't want us to be a poser. But I think in time, you start to really, more and more people have that intuition and judgment, which is what I rely on. I need my team to be able to judge, make sure they all know we cannot be posers. And our values have to be consistent even as we modernize.
And the values are so important, right?
Yes.
Younger generations seem to have a much more acute sense of authenticity than previously, especially being important in the marketing world. So with that, I'm wondering about the marriage of media and content. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was at another Brand Innovators event in Chicago, speaking to the ConAgra team, and they spoke a lot about how they're really trying to work closely together to marry media and content. And things, when you talk about modernizing, are changing so quickly, right? Somebody earlier said this is all about AI, today, but a year ago it was all about the metaverse. So how are you merging those two, media and content?
Not easy. Structurally, it helps. I've made a choice, right, to have it all under one leader, which creates its own, challenges in terms of the brands than are matrixed in. But I'd say it is. I know there's often a bit of a question when we look at it from a pure media and what we're good at measuring and have a lot of history too. Classically, the media, I have, as an organization myself, a very clear understanding of the ROIs to it, of what works, what doesn't. On the content side, that's been where we rely on, front-end metrics, but because it changes, the creative changes so much, and what it is, it's so broad, the ability to measure that on the same scale and make decisions then gets more difficult. So the measurement piece, I think for us, has been one that we've spent a lot of time, and how do we look at that? But then I have my own kind of thoughts around what my expectations are as well.
Right.
Where I call hardworking media versus work that is, I have to think of it more as long-term rather than short-term.
Right. I mean, I would say even in the media landscape right now, measuring certain emerging channels is really difficult too. So there's always a new challenge. Nothing is ever boring in marketing, right? And what about brand and performance? That's something that I think a lot of people are fascinated with, along with AI. There was quite a lot of talk about that at Cannes Lion this year. Brandformance is like a new-ish word. How do you balance that and identifying, and especially like with retail media emerging as an important performance driver? How are you thinking about that?
It is funny. Where did those terms come into existence? Because I guess I've never thought of them as separate entities. Ultimately, everything, when I look at a full P&L, not just even the marketing line, but when I look at a full P&L, anything that is in the red or is a negative, in my mind, is investment. And so when I think of marketing dollars or even trade dollar, promotion dollars, it has to be through the lens of driving both the brand as well as, I think what people mean by performance is short-term sales. So I see it as long-term sales, short-term sales. And we do have measurements across both, and we take into consideration both when we're doing our forecasts. And when we talk about making choices, the implications not just to the short-term sales, but also the long-term implications when we choose to, let's say, it's always hardest when you're trying to cut and have to reallocate. How do you decide in that? Also, when you're building or adding dollars, my expectation is, especially for modernization, Gen Z, bringing in younger consumers, it's a low ROI, and we're very transparent. Low short-term ROI, but very critical to long-term. So the brand versus performance for me is, we don't think of it in that way. I don't think of it in that way. I probably think of it short-term, long-term, a bit more upper funnel, lower funnel. Knowing everything is shoppable theoretically these days, but a bit of what's our intent, and therefore what's my kind of mathematical expectation between short and long.
Yeah, interesting. I was at a conference this summer and hearing someone from Sephora speak and how they used to put most of their budget in performance, and then they saw that they really weren't getting new consumers, so they changed their mix entirely, doing some in brands, some in performance. But it's exactly kind of what you said, short-term, long-term, because they said that it was like a year. It took a year for someone to convert. Are you like when you say?
I always forget being in CPG. There's a bit of what I take for granted. So I work for a CEO who grew up as a marketer, right? As a brand marketer. I have a CFO who's now my boss, who's now president, who loves. I think in the industry I'm in, there is no industry without brand. The value of a brand, and how I describe it, this is a little geeky, some financial terms, of when you look at the value of a CPG company, it's the intangible that is the multiple. And in that intangible is the value of a brand that's why I feel like, at least in my industry, there's no question of what's the value of that. And I think the Sephora one's a great example of, if you're only measuring short-term sales, you are impacting. There's an implication to the long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. So speaking of things, I know long-term projects, product innovation for a company like yours, I'm sure takes quite a long time. Of course, I don't work there, so you can confirm that for me. But are there any sneak peeks you can share with us today?
Yeah, an area, and this is very much in the soup world, that we have been having good success, and I'm really excited about what's in the pipeline. It is rethinking a bit of the flavors of soup. They really haven't changed that much if you go down that aisle. And over the last year, we've started to do some really fun, like bringing fun and excitement into that. We did a chunky ghost pepper chicken noodle soup that really just blew up, and so riding a bit of that spicy, what we know, continues to be a trend. There's nothing new about that, but being a bit daring in how we bring that into soup. So we've got, I think it's okay for me to share, like a chunky, spicy Nashville hot chicken soup that's coming out, a cheesy jalapeno burger. So it's just bringing that fun of almost snack flavors or QSR flavors, bringing that in. And that's on the flavor side. Maybe on the health side, I think we're shipping it as we speak, gluten-free, kind of the classic tomato and chicken noodle soups. They've not been accessible to those who don't want gluten or can't have gluten. So that's coming out. So those are, I think, the signs of how do we make sure we truly are appealing and thinking about a diverse audience and occasions.
Yeah, I mean, those are two really big trends, right?
Yeah.
Spicy. When I go to the market, I can't believe how many spicy options. It's like very, very
just craveable flavors. It's been fun, actually. Yeah.
And the gluten-free being mainstreamed now completely,
yes.
right? So, I think as a CMO, you have a lot of eyes on you. I feel like CMOs have a bit of the celebrity thing, and you're very down to earth. You kind of seem to eschew that side of it a little bit, but still, people are watching you and watching the decisions you make. So, how do you stay on top of those cultural moments, as an influencer yourself in the choices that you're making?
Yeah, it's a hard question because I definitely don't think of myself or see myself in that way. I think the most important thing is curiosity and for me personally, it's the true interest in learning from others and making sure that I don't stay within kind of the work box, right? The obvious. and certainly the four walls of Campbell's. It's so critical to be constantly looking outside and getting inspiration. But I also say to folks, like, as a human, and we are in the business of influencing humans, dissection of myself and my media habits and, what I see through. There's always insight in that. And I am very well known of being in a grocery store and, doing my own observational research and asking people why they chose what they chose and what did they, I do my research in the field as I live my day through. So I think curiosity.
Yeah, it's almost like why it's important to watch commercial television still sometimes to know what commercials are being aired, also going to the market, not just ordering everything on Amazon Fresh. Well, speaking of innovation, you guys did a campaign around metaverse and NFTs, and you won a Smarties for it. So congrats on that. So share a little bit about that.
So funny. It seems so long ago, and it was probably, right? I want to say maybe 2 years ago. And so many lessons in this one. We knew we needed to just redesign the visual identity of the classic red and white Campbell's, and so we had a new label, and the team did a great job of just how do you just get some attention in what we were doing there. And given the Andy Warhol, the pop culture art ties from the past, the NFT, everyone's got to kind of, put them back into 2 or 3 years ago, where NFTs, people, that was the thing. And it just felt like a very authentic way of what art at that moment in time, what the medium was. And so it was just a really creative way to reintroduce Campbell's in a medium that reflected the moment of art. It sounds easy, but of course at the time I know I was very much of, we can't be a poser though, and do we really understand NFTs, and does this feel right? And ultimately, my team, I had to trust them that they were closer to the technology, to culture, to how our consumers would respond. And it did work out well. And my lesson was a bit of, I have to ultimately trust the team, but ask the questions. What was interesting in that, though, there was lots of questions around, well, then what are you doing next in NFTs? And I remember at the time, just saying, I'm not ready to go all the way in because we don't know where the metaverse is really going. And it makes sense for this activation, but I'm not all in the feeling we have to do anything beyond. And because I had lots of probably pressure or questions around that. And I think that is a bit of just where we are today. You said it right, AI, metaverse, it's constantly ever changing. And as a leader, as a decision maker, you don't know what's the right answer, but you have to have that conviction or clarity, intentionality of making the decisions as these things are constantly being thrown at you as to what is the latest and greatest.
Right. Yeah, I have a lot of personal feelings on this.
Mm-hmm.
Being in the gaming sector and it being an emerging media category, people will test it and it will go well, but then they'll move on to a next thing. And I'm always like, well, why aren't you doing it again if it did well? And it's sort of reminding me of what...
stuck with gaming.
Right.
Yeah.
But the NFT thing, because you were like, it went well, but I'm not quite ready. So I'm curious.
Versus gaming, we went into Madden. This is on Chunky. We went into Madden. Nice. You could see the connection to the NFL. But then this last year we went to Fortnite. And it is very much of, it's not a one-time. We think there's something interesting if you think about the equity and how you bring it then to another space. But experimentation, and not necessarily the first time is the only thing that you do. There's other ways to expand.
Yeah, I mean, and eventually some of these just jump the ship to being standard and then always on. But and the AI thing, Coke's new drink, the AI drink, my kids got some, and I have to tell you, that thing has like 64 grams of sugar in it. I was like, what is AI thinking? Honestly, but whatever. And it didn't even taste that good or sugary. I'm like, what's going on here? I was very confused.
AI knows that we like sweet stuff.
I guess so, exactly. All right, so you have quite the portfolio, right? V8, Pacific Foods, Swanson, Prego, et cetera, on and on. How do you decide which of your children get the love and get the support?
It's
How
hard.
do you allocate? Do they fight with each other? Are they pitching you, please support me? And how
Well,
do
they
you...
should pitch. So I think that's the first thing that I tell my brand leads is that your job is to advocate and to bring the ideas. What probably one of my pet peeves is when I hear brand leaders ask, well, what's my budget? And then I'll bring you the idea. And I'm very much of, it shouldn't matter. If you believe in your idea, just because I tell you a number doesn't mean you can't get more. You know, the idea matters. But we have limited resources, have to make choices. Besides just overall strategies, we do have strategies around portfolio management of each of the brands, but someone once very wise said to me, and I've used it, and has stuck with me in making those difficult choices. 3 things: materiality, margin, and momentum. So each of those, if you are material to the overall company and business, you know, more of a chance. If you're high margin, so in terms of fueling growth, you know, earning that fuel, again, it's going to be easier for me to say yes. And then momentum. And when momentum, to me though, there's a short-term, long-term. So if I'm looking for a short-term result, I'm going to go with things that have natural tailwinds that are working and double down on those. But we have businesses that we have to create that momentum, but that becomes I need to know that short term, it's not going to deliver. And I've even personally in my career have made choices to offer. No brand leader, I think, offers money to a different brand, which I've done, when I realized we don't have the momentum, we need the time to build the right plan to then swing big. And so when in the short term though, when I have to make choices, it's those 3 things that I think about to then say, you know, I'm going to go, these are the places to bet on for the short term.
Right, interesting. Well, time has gone very quickly. I have more questions, but we're out of time. So maybe one quick question from the audience.
Hello, I'm Jenny, and I am the founder and CEO of Digital Voices, which is an influencer marketing agency with a lot of CPG clients. And I wanted to ask, how do you create the space for your teams to be reactive? Because CPG has so much potential for social trends, but also the challenge of often being a bit larger. So how do you create that freedom?
It really is putting aside people. And when I joined in trying to, you know, modernize, it was very clear to me there was no one whose job was to understand what's happening in culture and to enable that speed to act. And so we have, I mean, it's very codified in clarity. Ooh, I guess that means we need to leave. Or I've made a bad decision.
Luckily, we're at time.